One accountant for Paul Manafort testified Friday that she helped falsify tax records for her longtime client. Cindy Laporta has been given immunity from prosecution. She says she filed tax returns that she believed contained fraudulent information. President Trump's former campaign manager is facing hundreds of years in prison for tax and bank fraud, among other charges. Prosecutors working for special counsel Robert Mueller allege that he had millions of dollars paid to him by a Russian-backed group working to influence an election in Ukraine. They also say that he was in debt to a close associate of Vladimir Putin. This is the first trial to come out of the Mueller probe. For more on this, we turn to Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson in Los Angeles. Jessica, thank you for joining us. All this back and forth this week with this trial. What would you say was really the big moment?
Well, I think the big moment is probably when Paul Manafort's accountant admitted that she lied, that she falsified tax returns, because I think that's a key part of what we're talking about. Of course, this is the trial dealing with tax and bank fraud. And to the extent that an accountant is able to say, I didn't believe Paul Manafort, here's what I wrote down, I don't think that was correct, I've been granted immunity so I can tell you my story without fear of criminal prosecution, I think that's enormously significant.
You know, so much of this case has also been focusing on his lavish lifestyle that Manafort had. The judges pushed back, saying that's not what this trial is about. Why is the prosecution working so hard to portray him as this really lavish living kind of guy?
Well, I think what they're trying to do is say he is spending so much money. There's so much money going out the door, and there's really not enough money in a kind of credible and verifiable way going in the door. So let me show you why he had to have committed tax and banking fraud. Because he was spending all this money, he wasn't reporting it, and that shows that there was money coming from, let's say, undisclosed foreign bank accounts. That shows that loans weren't disclosed. That shows that business income wasn't disclosed. So it's all part of showing the jury kind of one side of the family bank account, which is the side where all the money goes out. And what the prosecution is now doing is saying, and let me show you the side where all the money is coming in. What's interesting, what you said about the judge here, is that this is a judge who is not really a great judge for the prosecution. He has said to the prosecution in the past, I don't think you really care about the banking and tax fraud claims. I think that you really just care about getting Paul Manafort to testify about any connections between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. And he's also made a number of comments, as you said, throughout this trial, where he said things like, well, look, I don't know all these name brands that you keep talking about. If it doesn't come from Men's Warehouse, it really doesn't mean anything to me. I get that he spent a lot of money on clothes. Move on, prosecution.
You know, we also know next week we're expecting to potentially hear from Manafort's longtime business partner, Rick Gates. He's been billed really as a star witness. What do you expect from his testimony, and do you think this could really seal the case for the prosecution?
I think that this is enormously important testimony for the prosecution to get Rick Gates, Paul Manafort's business partner, on the stand, to get him to walk through these financial transactions, to ask him, what did you disclose on your tax return? What did you not disclose? Tell me about these foreign bank accounts. And I think it's enormously important because the defense has shown us since its opening statements that its whole theory is you've got the wrong person. Rick Gates did all of these really bad things, but not my client, not Paul Manafort. And Rick Gates is going to get up on the stand and say, no, we were working together. We were partners. Paul Manafort knew exactly what he was doing. And here are all the things that violate federal statutes, which he did or we did together.
You know, the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, says they're going to decide if the president will sit down with Mueller. The president says he wants to do it, but his attorneys have been more cautious about it. Ultimately, isn't it up to President Trump to decide whether he does this interview or not?
It absolutely is. So President Trump is the person who decides whether or not he sits down with Robert Mueller, and his attorneys work for him. And so if he says, I'm going over there after breakfast today, and I'm going to have a nice conversation with him, then that's what's going to happen. And so I think what we're seeing here is a tension we've seen for a long time, where President Trump has one impulse, and then his advisors, and in this case his lawyers, are trying to pull him back and say, there's a lot of danger if you just go talk to Robert Mueller. There's a lot of criminal exposure. Let's try and limit this to the extent possible.
Why do you think it is that the president's legal team is so concerned not just about him sitting down for an interview, but also for the potential format? Why is that so important?
Well, I think because we've seen from President Trump, both as he's president and as he was candidate, and in his past litigation experiences, that he has problems keeping the same story. And so the format is very important, because if President Trump answers questions in writing, then his lawyers can help control the responses much more. If President Trump answers questions verbally, then it will be for Robert Mueller and his team to be able to quickly follow up real time and say, but what about this? But what about that? And can you explain this? And that is much more advantageous, frankly, for any investigator. But I think particularly when you have frankly, an undisciplined client like President Trump, who tends to shift his stories, who tends to blatantly contradict facts. So I think that for Robert Mueller's team, they absolutely want to get him in and get him talking, as opposed to just a written statement, which again is much more controlled.
Jessica Levinson, thank you very much for joining us, Jessica.
Thank you.